Hello, I'm Shuli Ghosh. You're watching Everywoman. This week, on strike for better pay, the Egyptian women putting the men to shame as they battle for better treatment. Ropes, reins and rawhide, the rough and tumble of the rodeo cowgirls. And putting the spotlight on polygamy, Indonesian filmmaker Nia Donata talks about her controversial film. For over a month now, workers have been staging a sit-in at a textile factory in rural Egypt. The majority of them are female. They're sleeping on the factory floors, leaving behind families and children in their demands for better pay. Why? Because the average wages for these women is a lowly $30 a month, not enough to feed and clothe their families. And since 1999, they haven't even been paid the bonuses and grants to which they're entitled. It's just one example of some 200 wildcat strikes which have taken place across Egypt in the past year. Everywoman followed one mother fighting for her future.
I've been in this company for 18 years. I earn £180 a month and I have a child who's being treated for cancer. I sleep there at the factory and my husband stays here with the children. Their father doesn't come home until 7 or even 8. I leave for half an hour a day so I can come home and see if they've eaten or if they're sleeping. I normally find that he's left them some food on a tray. They eat beans for breakfast, and that's all. Normally my husband doesn't leave me any money to buy them food. And so I go back to the factory to spend the night there. Sometimes he brings me the children so I can see them. But then they leave again. And now if I have to leave this company without any compensation, how am I going to eat? Where will I get the money from? From my husband? But what he earns won't pay the rent, or feed us, or get us clothes for the children. So how will we eat? And if I don't have any pension either, that means I'll be thrown out onto the streets. I'm 40 years old now, and my life has been spent here. 18 years. Where can I go and work now?
Every official we speak to says they'll try, they'll negotiate, they will. So what should we do? Nobody appreciates what it means that 80% of us here are women, married and unmarried, sleeping on the floor amongst the men. Yes, they are our brothers, but remember we are traditional people. Who will go back to her husband after this whole time and say, I'm back? Or do I go back to my father and say, here I am, without a single penny to show for it? I've been sleeping away from home for a month now. What will he think I've been doing?
I have 3 children. I've left them and don't go home to see them. Nobody's asking about us. We've been on the floor for a month now, with no food or anything to drink. They've cut everything off from us. Water, electricity, phones. Why? Where are they?
Well, joining me now in the studio is Dr. Barbara Ibrahim, a director of the Center for Philanthropy at the American University in Cairo. And in our Cairo studio is Egyptian journalist and blogger Hossam El-Hamalawi, who's been following these women for over a month now. Hossam, let me come to you first, because I know you've written a lot about these women at the Mansoura, Spain factory. Tell us about them. How desperate is their situation?
The situation is pretty dire over there. What we have here is a factory of a labor force that equals roughly 300 workers, 75% out of which are women. These women, they come from very poor backgrounds. They receive salaries, monthly salaries, roughly between $30 to $40. And you cut from that, actually, the money that they spend in transportation, which can consume like 1/3 of their salary. They haven't gotten paid their bonuses, which raises their salaries relatively since 1999. Out of a labor force that used to be 800, now they have cut down to 300. They are taking this industrial action because they are quite concerned that the owning bank are going to liquidate the firm.
It's a very courageous stand that they've taken, isn't it? I mean, they're sleeping on a factory floor, they're sleeping alongside male protesters. What do their families think about this? Do their families support them?
From what the women were telling us, I mean, journalists, is that their families were quite supportive because they understand quite well that they don't have any other choice. One woman worker I spoke with, and I asked her whether her husband sanctioned actually her action. So her reply was, my husband understands quite well that if this company is closed and if I leave the sit-in, both of us are going to end in the street. Some of the women workers we spoke with told us that initially their families were not happy with their industrial action, and actually one of them got assaulted even by her parents in the factory. But the same woman told me later that her parents changed her mind after her fellow colleagues, both men and women, visited the family at their homes and explained to them what they were doing. It's quite impressive. I mean, Egypt is a very conservative and a sexist country, unfortunately. So to find these women taking such brave and courageous action in such a provincial town, it's quite impressive.
Indeed. Barbara, Hossam paints quite a desperate picture for these women. What is the situation for women in rural Egypt? Are they exploited, underpaid?
Well, certainly rural women have always worked. They worked on family farms, they did secondary production of food. But the new phenomenon of the last 20 years or so is that they've moved into modern production in small to medium-sized factories. And this is a situation which has been largely unregulated. They've been pushed into that kind of labor by the need to feed their children, support their families. And yes, they're in a vulnerable position. A second reason that makes them vulnerable is that the supply of women wanting to work is so much greater than the available jobs. In the 1970s, it was sometimes one job to 13 uneducated women looking for factory jobs. Now I suspect that that may have doubled.
So are women in Egypt becoming more politically active?
Well, that's the really interesting question, because one might say a woman whose job, is the way she can support her family would tend to put her head down and not make a fuss. But in fact, we see over and over again in situations of potential political repercussions that women take a stand. And it's something that I think bears more reflection.
So women are becoming a driving force in this kind of action, aren't they?
They are, and whether it's in industrial action or outside, I mean, women are playing a central role in the political movement here in Egypt. One of the few remarks that journalists and activists can tell you, those who've been monitoring street activities since the outbreak of the Palestinian Intifada in 2000, you can see clearly that women activists are usually in the front line. They are the ones at the beginning of the demo who actually clash with the police or try to protect their fellow demonstrators. Last December, women played a central role in the Ghazl al-Mahalla textile strike. These 3,000 women, they started marching inside the factory, and then they stormed the sections where their male colleagues were working in the spinning and weaving, and then they started chanting "الرجالة فين الحريم أهو," which in English basically means, where are the men? Here we are, the women. So that's when their male colleagues got ashamed and they joined the strike, and it was one of the most successful actually strikes in post-World War II Egypt.
Barbara, what is the reaction to the fact that women are becoming more proactive? As Hossam was describing there, they were actually provoking the men into joining them in this action. What does the government make of all this?
Well, I'm sure they're terrified, because it's one thing to put down mob action of men, which can easily turn violent. They can use the pretext that they had to preserve the peace. But when women protest, it's my observation that they tend to use peaceful methods. They are stronger, they're more sustained in their action, and of course, the public outcry. Were state security police to do anything physically to them would be so great that I suspect at this point the government is negotiating with kid gloves on.
Hossam, I want to ask you finally, just give us the very latest update on the women's situation at the Mansoura Spain company. Are they going to win this battle?
When you speak to the women workers there, they are assured of victory because they don't have any other choice, basically. The last offer that the bank came back to the workers with is the following, is that they're going to give them a 2-month salary as a compensation for every year they worked, in addition to 1,000 Egyptian pounds. Because the owning bank is intending to liquidate the firm, it seems. But the women workers over there are refusing totally this offer, and they are continuing with the sit-in. And the sit-in has actually reached now its 40th day.
Okay, well, I know that you'll continue to follow the fortunes of the women at that factory. Thank you very much for joining us, both of you today. Hossam El Hamalawi in Cairo and Dr. Barbara Ibrahim joining us here in the studio. Thank you both very much indeed. Now, coming up, saddle sores and broken bones. It's a lot of bull, but cowgirls love it. That's rodeo life after the break.